It was October 14th in the year 1066 that King Harold II of England is defeated by the Norman forces of William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, fought on Senlac Hill, 7 miles from Hastings, England. At the end of the bloody, all-day battle, Harold continued his eternity, shot in the eye with an arrow, according to legend, and his forces were destroyed. He was the last Anglo-Saxon king of England. Just over 2 weeks before, William, the Duke of Normandy, had invaded England, claiming his right to the English throne. In 1051, William is believed to have visited England and met with his cousin Edward the Confessor, the childless English king. According to Norman historians, Edward promised to make William his heir. On his deathbed, however, Edward granted the kingdom to Harold Godwin, head of the leading noble family in England and more powerful than the king himself. In January of 1066, King Edward continued his eternity, and Harold Godwin was proclaimed King Harold II. William immediately disputed his claim. On September 8th in 1066, William landed in England at Pevensey, on Britain's southeast coast, with approximately 7,000 troops and cavalry. Seizing Pevensey, he then marched to Hastings, where he paused to organize his forces. On October 13th, Harold arrived near Hastings with his army, and the next day, William led his forces out to give battle. After his victory at the Battle of Hastings, William marched on London and received the city's submission. On Christmas Day, 1066, he was crowned the first Norman king of England in Westminster Abbey, and the Anglo-Saxon phase of English history came to an end. French became the language of the king's court and gradually blended with the Anglo-Saxon tongue to give birth to modern English. William I proved an effective king of England, and the Domesday Book, a great census of the lands and people of England, was among his notable achievements. Upon the continuance of eternity of William I in 1087, his son William Rufus became William II, the second Norman king of England. On October 14th in the year 1947, United States Air Force Captain Chuck Yeager becomes the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound. Charles Yeager was born in Myra, West Virginia in 1923. He was a combat fighter during World War II, and he flew 64 missions over Europe. He shot down 13 German planes and was himself shot down over France, but he escaped capture with the assistance of the French underground. After the war, he was among several volunteers chosen to test fly the experimental X-1 rocket plane, built by the Bell Aircraft Company to explore the possibility of supersonic flight. For years, many aviators believed that man was not meant to fly faster than the speed of sound, theorizing that transonic drag rise would tear any aircraft apart. All that changed on October 14th in 1947, when Charles Yeager flew the X-1 over Rogers Dry Lake in Southern California. The X-1 was lifted to an altitude of 25,000 feet by a B-29 aircraft and then released through the bomb bay, rocketing to 40,000 feet and exceeding 662 miles per hour, which is the sound barrier at that altitude. The rocket plane, nicknamed Glamorous Glennis after Yeager's wife, was designed with thin, unswept wings and a streamlined fuselage modeled after a .50 caliber bullet. Because of the secrecy of the project, Bell and Yeager's achievement was not announced until June 1948. Yeager continued to serve as a test pilot, and in 1953, he flew 1,650 miles per hour in an X-1A rocket plane. He retired from the U.S. Air Force in 1975 with the rank of a brigadier general. Charles Yeager continued his eternity on December 7th in the year 2020, the 79th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was 97 at the time. was on October 14th in the year 1964 that African American civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent resistance to racial prejudice in our nation. At 35 years of age, the Georgia-born minister was the youngest person ever to receive the award. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta in 1929. The son of a Baptist minister. He received a doctorate degree in theology and in 1955 organized the first major protest of the civil rights movement, the successful Montgomery bus boycott. Influenced by Mohandas Gandhi, he advocated non-violent civil disobedience to racial segregation. The peaceful protests he led throughout the American South were often met with violence, but King and his followers persisted, and their nonviolent movement gained momentum. A powerful orator, he appealed to Christian and American ideals and won growing support from the federal government and northern whites. In 1963, he led his massive march on Washington, in which he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" address. In 1964, the Civil Rights Movement achieved two of its greatest successes: the ratification of the 24th Amendment, which abolished the poll tax, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public facilities. In October of that same year, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He donated the prize money, valued at $54,600, to the civil rights movement. Wow, now that I didn't know. In the late 1960s, Martin Luther King openly criticized U.S. involvement in Vietnam and turned his efforts to winning economic rights for poor Americans. By that time, the civil rights movement had begun to fracture with activists such as Stokely Carmichael, rejecting King's vision of non-violent integration in favor of African-American self-reliance and self-defense. In 1968, King intended to revive his movement through an interracial Poor People's March on Washington. But on April 4th, he continued his eternity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was struck by an assassin's bullet at the Lorraine Motel just weeks before the demonstration was scheduled to begin.
Victoria.